Hello everyone, welcome to Psych, and today I want to talk about whether or not we use all 8 cognitive functions proposed by Jung. And this is a topic that you're going to see differing responses to depending on which system you use in the personality typology community. But in this specific video, I'm going to be talking about how Carl Jung, as well as the Myers-Briggs model, viewed the cognitive functions and whether or not we use all 8 through those two systems. Let's get into it. So, do we use all 8 cognitive functions? Well, the short answer is no, but there's some caveats to that. So Carl Jung originally proposed 8 cognitive functions, but in my opinion, the functions have been kind of misinterpreted over the past few decades, and there's been some fundamental misunderstanding of how the functions work and what they are. So Carl Jung originally proposed the ideas of thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition, and these are essentially, in reality, the 4 functions. There's really only 4 functions, but the attitude of these 4 functions is what separates how these functions work. And that's what makes the difference in how the functions play out, such as, for example, introverted feeling and extroverted feeling. What I'm essentially saying here is that introverted feeling and extroverted feeling aren't two inherently different functions. They're two ends of the same spectrum of one function, which is feeling. And the being on one end of this spectrum is what causes you to have that function compared to the other function, which is the same function but in the opposite attitude. Take, for example, again, introverted feeling and extroverted feeling. When you are using extroverted feeling, you're using your value system in the objective form. You're looking outwards towards the values of those close to you, the emotions that they feel and what those mean to you. But if you have introverted feeling, if you're leaning towards the subjective side of the function of feeling, then you're going to be looking inwards with your values. You're going to be looking at your internal values compared to the external objective ones of those close to you. These are the same reasons that we wouldn't say that an INFP with dominant introverted feeling, for example, is repressing extroverted feeling in any form. Because the cognitive need for feeling, the cognitive need for values is still being met by introverted feeling. And therefore, thinking is still the repressed function. Extroverted feeling is not more repressed than extroverted thinking, it is simply not in use. The lens of objective values are not being used in the dominant introverted feeling type because their value system is subjective. They are using a singular lens of internal values to kind of measure how things are important to them compared to the extroverted feeling type, which is looking at how things externally are important to them on that same value scale. So this is where the caveat comes into play. Because we can technically still value things that are on the opposite side of the thing that we have as a cognitive function. Say, for example, again, the introverted feeling type can occasionally value things on the external and objective side of values. But that isn't going to mean that they're using, say, for example, extroverted feeling. They're going to be using introverted feeling in a way that kind of mimics extroverted feeling's natural use. And that is why people tend to get confused. Because in reality, extroverted feeling is still not being used because they're not inherently valuing the external objective values of the people close to them. They're valuing them in the same introverted feeling way, but they're doing it through their lens, their specific introverted feeling lens compared to the way in which an extroverted feeling type would do it. And this is to say that some functions can kind of mimic the outcomes of other functions, especially if they're the exact same function, like feeling, for example, to get to kind of the same result using different methods. This isn't to say that INFPs have extroverted feeling. They have their own version of getting to the same results as an extroverted feeling type. So let's take a look at a different cognitive function to try and flesh out these definitions a little bit. Let's take a look at intuition, for example. So intuition is a cognitive function that is focused on possibilities and outcomes, but whether it's in the introverted or extroverted form, subjective or objective, is going to determine how an individual's intuition is going to determine what it values. So for example, extroverted intuition values as many possible outcomes as it can perceive, whereas introverted intuition, on the other hand, values singular perceptions, singular outcomes that they think are more likely to happen. And the differences in these two ends of the same spectrum, the two different sides of intuition, is the difference in how this singular cognitive function essentially plays out. Because both of these are still intuition, they're still valuing an outcome in some form, but they're valuing two different sides of this singular thing. So the interesting thing about the cognitive functions and about having a 4-function stack is that having a 4-function stack meets all of our needs as individuals. So Carl Jung divided the functions into subjective, objective, rational, and irrational functions. And the different combinations of these is what determines how our function plays out. But by having a 4-function stack, we have all of the combinations met. So take, for example, we look at an INTJ. INTJs have dominant introverted intuition. This is a subjective irrational function. So then we look at extroverted thinking, the secondary function. This is an objective rational function. Then we look at tertiary introverted feeling. This is a subjective rational function. Then we look at repressed extroverted sensing. This is an objective irrational function. All of the combinations between these things are met by having 4 cognitive functions. This is the same reason why an INTJ, for example, can't have repressed introverted sensing compared to extroverted sensing, because the need for objective irrationality is still there. And by using a subjective irrational function as a dominant cognitive function, then objective irrationality is completely ignored. It is repressed. And this is why the cognitive functions make a lot of sense to me in a 4-function stack model, because this is perfectly aligned to make it so we have all of our cognitive needs met. Alright everybody, I hope you've enjoyed this video on whether or not we use all 8 cognitive functions. In my opinion, this is a really important topic if you're interested in personality typology through the lens of Carl Jung's work, because it's important to know how the system that you're using actually works. You need to know the operational definitions. You need to know the exact definitions of how things are playing out. And by having a real understanding of how your system works and what each function means and how it's used, you can better understand how you need to use the system to improve yourself or make a difference in your own life. I would like to remind everybody that I do have personality typing sessions available at my website, asuraspsych.com, if you're interested in working with me to find out your personality type. This has been Asura at Asura Psych. Have a good one.